May the words of my mouth and the thoughts of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O God, our strength and our salvation. You who desire the day of the Lord, why? Why? God asks, why do you want the day of the Lord, which is also known as the day of judgment, the day of reckoning, the day of comeuppance? Why? Asks God. And yet we know why. We long for the day of the Lord. We literally long for it. Our news coverage, our movies and computer games and narratives and literature, our politics, our religion, even the hymns we sing are full of that day when good will triumph and bad will be vanquished, a day when right will win. And yet today, in the passage from the prophet Amos, read for us by Henry, God says, be careful what you wish for. Be very careful. For the day of judgment, and God repeats it twice, so we probably should pay attention. The day of judgment brings darkness, not light. And we may ask, what is so wrong with right winning? Why is God warning us? Well, what God seeks is justice. May justice roll down like streams. And surely that's what we want too, right? Justice. But justice is not the same as judgment. Now, it's easy to see how we could mistake it, because after all, the Justice Department deals with judgment, crime and punishment, law and order. Its remit is to come to a judgment as to who is in the right and who is not, and to act accordingly. Yet, justice is actually something very different. When I was a chaplain at St. Mark's Academy in Mitcham, we explored a process called restorative justice with the children, which was not about who was in the right and who was in the wrong in a particular circumstance. A particular incident that was usually, the tip of an iceberg of a whole pile of incidents and relationships that had gone on before. And instead of looking at the rights and wrongs of that particular incident and coming to a judgment, what we tried to explore was, what was the relationship? What relationships had gone before? How had they been damaged and broken? And were there ways in which we could restore those relationships? Justice is not about judgment. It's all about relationship. It involves understanding, it involves listening, it involves exploring really complicated effects of power and inequality on the real lives of communities and individuals. So, for instance, should Amari throw a chair at Carl during a lesson, instead of focusing on the throwing of the chair, we might want to focus on what had gone on before the throwing of the chair. And that would lead us to uncover a whole pile of very complicated relationships that reached out from the relationship between those two children and into relationships between communities, races, genders, families. It was hard work. So, at a time when our threat level, our security level in the UK has been raised, which means that someone has made a credible threat against us, that we are afraid there will be an incident. And in the context of the last few weeks, when we've seen a history teacher beheaded in Paris, 3 people killed in Nice, 4 in Vienna, 22 students in Kabul as a result of terror attacks of violence. We have to ask ourselves whether we want judgment or whether we want justice. As we remember today those who died, both ally and enemy, both soldier and civilian, in the First World War and in the more than 150 major armed conflicts that have scarred our humanity since then, and in the conflicts that still rage as we sit here this morning. What should we seek? If we seek judgment, will we find darkness? If we seek justice, will we find those life-giving streams that roll down as ever-living waters? It's quite difficult to understand how we can do that which rejects death and judgment, and how we can actively ally ourselves to that which is life-giving. Because the thing about justice is it's complicated and hard. And it's not easy to put into a soundbite. It's not dramatic and it's not heroic and it's not glamorous. It's not like, standing with great righteousness and unleashing the dogs of war upon the forces of evil. It's really small-scale, tedious work. It's quiet work, it's mundane work, it's person-sized work, and it begins with a concern and a curiosity about those who are driven to violence, as well as those who are the victims of violence. And it questions how and where any kind of injustice is impacting upon the real lives of the children of God. And it's always, and this thing we find so hard, it's always prioritizing the individual, the widow, the orphan, the one who mourns, the poor, the one with no hope, the one who has no home, the one who is rejected, the one who is excluded, the one who is marginalized, even if that one is wrong. Even if that one commits violence, even if that one is an enemy, even if that one has shown disregard for the lives and well-being of others. Make no mistake, this work is costly and time-consuming, as even the smallest example of trying to implement it in a secondary school will attest. It requires a sustained commitment to understanding the complexities of life, a willingness to change both our views and our behaviors, and a preparedness to maybe let go of some of our power and privilege. A compassionate response to terror and to violence is often painted as a sign of weakness, as a wishy-washy response, when we want a strong response. But it's not. It requires infinite courage. It is, in fact, an act of God. God in whom all things and all people live and move and have their being. That God constantly creating something new out of the mess that we make, continues, and God only knows why, but that God continues to have faith in us. Continues to have faith in us after all this time, thousands and thousands of years of day of judgment after day of judgment after day of judgment. God still believes that we can get it. That we can and we will one day see that judgment only ever ensures that our enemies remain enemies. And that love, relationship, compassionate, concerned, curious, creative, costly love is the one thing that has the power to transform an enemy into a friend.